Welcome to another episode of the Community Broadband Bits podcast. I'm Christopher Mitchell at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance in St. Paul, Minnesota. And today I'm coming back to two people that have been on the show many times, have long worked in the public interest. We've got Harold Feld, Senior Vice President at Public Knowledge. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
And we've also got Michael Calabrese, who is the Director of Wireless Future at New America's Open Technology Institute. Welcome.
Yeah, great to be on. Thanks, Chris.
I'm excited to talk with both of you, but not thrilled about the topic. We're talking about a threat to Wi-Fi and CBRS. I think this is something that I did talk about last week with WISPA and some of the threats to CBRS that we are seeing, and we're gonna walk through it. We might get a little technical here and there, but we're gonna try and bring it back and make sure people know what we're talking about and what they can do to try to make sure that we don't lose any of the spectrum that is currently reserved for people like us to use and small ISPs and things like that. So I want to start by asking Harold, can you just tell us briefly, like, what is going on?
So spectrum auctions come up whenever you have a budget crunch because it's viewed by most members of Congress as money without raising taxes. And the estimate here is about 80 to 90 billion dollars that could be raised through the FCC auctioning spectrum. So although fights between the Army and the FCC over taking back federal spectrum to be auctioned meant that the FCC's auction authority expired back in 2023. Now it's coming back. Everybody knows it's coming back. And the issue here is, are you just going to reauthorize it? Are you going to tell the FCC that they have to do certain types of auctions? And how are you going to do that? And that's where the fight comes in.
And this is a budget bill that is moving through that's going to set the budget for the federal government. And as part of that, they're going to be renewing auction authority. And so there's a lot of sort of policy mixed in with money here, is what you're saying, basically.
Right. The problem is you want to do good spectrum policy, but for 430 of those 435 members of Congress, it's just about the money.
And now, Michael, we are not in the 1940s. We don't have a ton of spectrum just sitting there totally unused. And so when we talk about auctioning off spectrum to try to raise 80 or 90 billion dollars, where do they have to look for it?
Well, that's the big challenge they've been trying to get over for 2 years now, is that all of the best spectrum, the spectrum that the mobile industry wants, that Wi-Fi uses, that so many other services use, has all been assigned and is occupied by someone. So it's become a sort of a zero-sum game where, in order to auction for exclusive use, you have to clear someone else out of that band. And the mobile industry is only willing to pay billions for what they call mid-band spectrum, which is really a fairly, in the whole range of frequencies that we call the spectrum, it's just a small part of that that's recently become the best combination of both propagation, in other words, how far it goes, and penetration, how well it would go through into buildings, for example. And so everyone wants to be in the mid-band these days. It's the new beachfront.
So we have a situation in which there's an effort to auction off spectrum and a goal to raise 80 or 90 billion dollars. We currently are in a situation in which the Senate is trying to decide how it wants to move forward. But I want to talk first about how the House resolved it, because I think that'll set the stage for better understanding what might come next. So the House was presented with this issue, and I don't know how much we'll get into it, but broadly, AT&T and others have laid the groundwork with years of lobbying to try to undercut things like CBRS and other forms of spectrum sharing and things like that that I would probably that we won't get into that aspect as much, but we think are very important for the future efficient use of the spectrum. But Harold, give us a sense of what happened in the House, how that wrapped up.
So in the House, they struck a compromise rather than saying what specific bands had to be auctioned. They said, okay, we're going to take a range from about 1 gigahertz approximately to about 10 gigahertz approximately. So that's a big range. A lot of it's already full, but they said FCC find 600 megahertz somewhere in that 10 gigahertz range that you can auction. And that was not great for us, but it also did something very important. It said that 6 gigahertz band that is now being used for Wi-Fi 6 and that's intended for Wi-Fi 7, that doesn't count towards your goal. So don't auction that because that's not going to help you. Let Wi-Fi do its thing and keep growing and giving people the capacity they need. So the House gave the FCC and the federal government a choice to try to figure out who could be moved around for what, but it said absolutely don't touch that new Wi-Fi band because people are in it, they're using it, and it's growing.
Right. So Michael, as we talk about this a little bit, I think I'm curious if you want to go in a different direction, but let me start you off. And people might be familiar, they're seeing 2.4. So Wi-Fi started in 2.4 gigahertz, and then it got a chunk of 5 gigahertz. That's what most of us are using in our homes now. And then 6 years ago or so, the FCC opened up a lot of the 6 gigahertz band for Wi-Fi. That's now on the market. A lot of it. I think when I talk to rural and urban ISPs that are doing wireless, they're really excited about the potential of really getting into that 6 gigahertz space. And so these are areas that are being used. The thing that I'm always curious about when I talk to an expert like you is for people to understand 80 or 90 billion dollars sounds like a lot of money. How do we measure that against the value of Wi-Fi and CBRS and technologies like that?
Yeah, so it's actually a small amount of money compared to the value for consumers and the economy of Wi-Fi. Recent studies by economists are now projecting, I believe they roughly, don't hold me exactly to this, but that roughly Wi-Fi is generating about $700 billion a year in consumer welfare and producer surplus and GDP, all totaled up for the economy, and that will hit $1 trillion by the end of the before the end of the decade. And these next generations of Wi-Fi that can only operate well in this expanded 6 gigahertz range have all the capabilities of the mobile carrier networks of 5G in terms of being really high, in fact, much higher throughput, low latency, being able to connect hundreds of devices in the same crowded location, and so on. So really, Wi-Fi has become an input to everything in the economy. And there was a survey recently, and when people were asked about, quote, broadband, they equated Wi-Fi and internet. They didn't know the difference between Wi-Fi, broadband, and internet. It's all one thing because when you're actually on the internet with a mobile device, smartphone, laptop, whatever, it's it's always at the end, it's Wi-Fi.
Yeah,
Right,
and
it's magic.
and just to add a couple of things to that. First of all, we now have just a ton of devices that have to use Wi-Fi. The laptop, the Apple laptop that I'm talking to you from does not have an Ethernet plug so that I could actually plug this into a wall or a router. I've got to use Wi-Fi for this. Um, all of your smart devices in your home, whether you want them or not, are using Wi-Fi. Most of your streaming is not built to be have a plug into it anymore. It's Wi-Fi. So we are doing more and more with this. We are putting more and more demand on this. We are putting more and more demand in the home. And people are building the devices and the services in the expectation that you are going to have abundant available Wi-Fi. You're running maybe a fiber strand to your home to get a gigabit or more going to the home. We're counting on Wi-Fi that can carry that gigabit load because otherwise the speed is just going to drop to molasses. I mean, what good is it to me to pay for, a gigabit fiber strand coming into my home if I can't get more than 50 or 60 megabits per second because I've got all of my devices running and I can't use all of I've got, very limited space for my Wi-Fi to work, which is the thing we're worried about here.
In addition, keep in mind that except for smartphones, none of those devices that Harold mentioned has a cellular connection. I mean, virtually zero laptops or tablets. They're completely dependent on Wi-Fi. And then all the smaller devices, it would not only be unaffordable, but completely impractical in terms of form factor, battery life, and so on. And then there's, the enterprise side as well, where Wi-Fi and especially this next generation of Wi-Fi will be powering private IoT networks as well.
Yeah, this is the big wireless carriers are like, oh yeah, we don't want people to use that free Wi-Fi stuff. We want them to have to pay to use our networks. But the reality is, if all of the traffic or even a chunk of the traffic shifted off of your home Wi-Fi network to try to go through your cell phone, everybody, in the neighborhood all doing that at once, the cellular networks would collapse. There's just no way they could handle it. It would be a catastrophe.
It would be a super inefficient use of spectrum, is what it would be.
Right.
Right. The
That
way
too.
to, the way to use it efficiently is what we've been doing. So I'm curious, Michael, as you watched, we're going to come to the Senate in a minute here, but as you watched in the House, I'm curious how you were reacting to what you saw and how the compromise ended up.
Well, we were certainly not happy that in order to maximize what they thought was to maximize revenue to help offset tax cuts and other things they wanted to pay for, um, that the House was mandating 600 megahertz to auction, and not only to auction, but for I guess what they call full power exclusive use, which means that it's really only the three big mobile carriers that would, be bidding, you know, billions of dollars. And so that part was not good.
Yeah,
On the other
Michael, can
hand,
I
there
can
was
I can
this,
I cut you off for a second? Because
yeah,
I feel like as you said that, I have this vision of these representatives feeling like, well, there's free money out there, and we're going to get that free money from the spectrum, not realizing that it's not free money. They are taking that money from our future. That is, we're going to have less effective home networking, and we're going to have less innovation in the future because that's where they're taking the money from. I mean, I think that's an accurate way of representing it, wouldn't you think?
well, that's a pretty common complaint about Congress that it it very much discounts the future that extends beyond their next reelection. So yeah, and most of them don't even understand the interaction. What most of them are hearing is, oh, the mobile carriers need more spectrum. They'll pay billions for it. And oh, we happen to need billions, so let's just do this without thinking of, in fact, just to complete so you understand maybe the somewhat bright side was that at least the House Energy and Commerce Committee recognized that there was potential collateral damage. They didn't want FCC to run roughshod. So they included, as Harold mentioned, two exclusions. One was the um, military spectrum in the lower 3 GHz band that was considered the most sensitive military spectrum that the mobile industry most wants. They've been trying to get their hands in that for years. And so they excluded that and they excluded the 6 GHz Wi-Fi band. And then things only got worse in the Senate.
And when you say that, it means that the Congress, under this set of rules, which has yet to be adopted officially, they're still working on it. The Federal Communications Commission has to auction off a certain amount of spectrum, but they get none of if they auction off a bunch of the stuff in 6 GHz or in the lower 2 GHz, they would not get credit for that. They still have to find a bunch of other stuff, so they'd have no incentive to do it. So the House version is protecting
Right.
this right now, which is what we would like to see.
Yeah, no credit for it. And also, it's a pretty strong congressional statement, to actually write an exclusion in it. It's because this is passed with entirely only with Republican votes. So the Republican chairman of the Federal Communications Commission is probably not going to then turn around and try to do that.
So, last question before we turn to what's happening in the Senate is I just want to get a quick sense of when we know that AT&T and other wireless mobile companies, the other two, Verizon, T-Mobile, are willing to pay billions, tens of billions of dollars for this. Is that because they need the spectrum to put it to use right away, or is that because they need other people not to have it so they can maintain their value as a monopoly, more or less?
Well, you have to say, what are we, yeah, you have to look at who they're talking to. When they're talking in front of Congress, they're like, we need this, we need this right now. China is already allocating more spectrum, and somehow that means that they're going to win something, and give it to us because we totally need it. When they go and talk to their shareholders and they're kind of under oath to tell the truth to the Securities Exchange Commission, then they're like, oh, we've got plenty. We're good. AT&T's CEO, I think Michael,
Hmm.
just said, what, we've got enough for 20 years, 25 years, something like that.
Yeah, certainly 10 at least. He said, we don't know how, technology is always evolving. We'll probably need more in the future, but they're good for 5 to 10 years at least.
So for a lot of these guys, two things. One, the wireless industry has always hated unlicensed spectrum. It's less bad than it used to be, but they spend a lot of time trash talking it. They spend a lot of money to generate reports trash talking it because God forbid you should use for free what they want to sell you. So, you know, I got to download a big download or I want to stream something. Well, I can blow through my data cap and pay extra if I'm on AT&T, or I can go home or somewhere else that's got a Wi-Fi hotspot and do it for free. So, which do you think AT&T wants you to do?
Yeah, and that's for me is like one of the key parts of this is that when they have the spectrum that they have, the market more or less works to allocate that efficiently. Where if they have an issue where they're starting to run out of spectrum, they can do more localization and going to the small cells and offloading it and using it more efficiently. They have opportunities available, and so when I'm looking at them needing to like warehouse spectrum, to me it looks like it's more about maintaining their value and foreclosing competition than it is other things. But I'm also the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. I'm primed to look for that sort of thing. So,
Yeah.
it's not too surprising. That's what I
Yeah.
see.
Yeah. I'd say, look, there's a little of both because one of the problems about spectrum auctions is you never know when the next one is going to be. So the wireless industry is always like, give it to us now, give it to us now, give it to us now. Maybe we'll need it someday and we want to have it in the bank. But additionally, give it to us now so that nobody else can get it. We don't want new competitors in the mobile space to come along. You have EchoStar that's trying to come in with Boost. So they're all like, give it to us now while Boost is teetering on the edge of bankruptcy so we can outbid them and keep a competitor out. technical term for that, as you know, is foreclosure. But it's also like, yeah, we don't want other people doing for free what we want to sell back to you.
Now,
Hmm.
Michael, does that bring us up to the Senate and what is happening there?
Yeah, I think so. So I can tell you how the Senate version is different at this point, although while the House has passed, their BBB, big beautiful bill, the Senate is still a work in progress. But what the Commerce Committee has, or what the chairman of the Commerce Committee, Ted Cruz, has put forth is, from our point of view, much worse. So, I mentioned a few things. Um, First, he increased the auction mandate from 600 to 800 megahertz. So that by itself puts a lot more pressure on the FCC to find whatever spectrum it can get its hands on to auction. Um,
Right, that's so a 33% increase. It's not like there's a bunch of spectrum that's not used. You've got the Department of Defense, you're probably not going to take their spectrum away from them, or at least not very much. You've got like AT&T, Verizon, those other companies, they're not going to give it away. There's a lot of companies for whom they might have a small amount and they can't possibly give it away because then they would have none. So you're if you go from 600 to 800, it's a huge difference, I'm guessing.
right. And one reason they increased from 600 to 800 is the members of the Senate Armed Services Committee and the Intelligence Committee decided that the House bill did not protect the military enough. And so they wanted even stronger language, and they wanted to add another 1,000 megahertz of spectrum that the military and the intelligence agencies use to the protected list, to the excluded. So they added an exclusion for the 7 gigahertz band for a full 1,000 megahertz, and took off, they dropped the exclusion for Wi-Fi for the 6 gigahertz band.
So they're trying to get more from they're trying to get more spectrum auctioned off of a smaller base after all those
Exactly.
changes.
That's yeah, and because they excluded an additional 1,000 megahertz, the score actually went down a little. The Congressional Budget Office calculation of estimated revenue from future auctions went down to 85 billion from 88. So they actually would be raising less than the House bill, but it's a really bad sign that they would explicitly drop the exclusion for 6 gigahertz. They must have done that to try to keep, the budget number up, the revenue estimate up. And it really paints a target on Wi-Fi as something that, or at least a big portion of the upper 6 gigahertz band as something that could be auctioned.
Yeah, that's the future Wi-Fi where we'll be might not need it
Yeah,
today, but we'll be using it soon.
and not future as in hypothetical or years from now, like as in it's it's already it's going to market this year. Later this year, we're starting to move from Wi-Fi 6E to Wi-Fi 7, beginning with, enterprise users. So this like really high capacity Wi-Fi with, little delay, much better in crowded places. That's all just about on the cusp, just about to happen. And the reason, I think we missed saying this earlier, but just so folks understand, is Wi-Fi, as you said, when it started in 2.4, it was 20 megahertz channels. And so you could have maybe, the total capacity might be 100 or 200 megabits per second in your home. And Wi-Fi ended up creating there was kind of a home Wi-Fi bottleneck as people started to get fiber to the home or even cable. The Wi-Fi didn't have enough capacity, so then they added a lot of spectrum into 5 gigahertz. So we got up to say 60 uh, uh, megahertz channels. Well, now in the 6 gigahertz band, which added 1,200 megahertz, and this was during the first Trump administration in 2020 by unanimous 5-0 vote. Everyone thought it was brilliant to add all the spectrum for Wi-Fi to make it future-proof. They can get up to 320 megahertz wide channels, multi-gigabit capacity, which is so important for, homes might not even need all of it, but certainly schools, libraries, public spaces, community wireless networks, enterprise, everybody who has a
Homes are
lot of
going to need
bandwidth.
it. I mean,
Yeah.
you're not going to pay to get a 10 gigabit connection from Comcast or Fios or whoever just so that it can drop to 300 megabits per second as soon as it gets into my house. I mean, nobody does that. And the things you have to understand are there's two things that go on here. One is how big are these channels and how many of these channels are there? And the size of the channels tells you how much the capacity is for a device, and the number of devices tells you how much you can squeeze in there because the more crowded it is, the slower it's going to be. The longer it takes for a device to find an open channel, the more buffering you get, the more the slower it gets, and all of this, as we said before, keeps increasing. And just to make it even more fun, it's not like the only thing in this band is Wi-Fi. There are a couple of licensed users in here, um, mostly electric utilities and power companies. They use this stuff at on their poles. So Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 7 are structured so that they don't interfere with that. But you're talking about if we have to auction off a chunk of this, you're talking about moving everybody into half the space. So that's a lot of crowding.
Now, I'm curious about, is this normally the way we sort out spectrum issues is in a omnibus budget bill? Which I say partially, it doesn't seem ideal, but also it might be just the way Congress works. Is this something, I don't remember it happening that frequently before. Is this something that's kind of new?
Well, a lot of times you get this as part of a budget bill. Um, but what has traditionally happened was first they said, okay, FCC have 10 years of auction authority. And a lot of this are what I call stupid budget tricks. Why 10 years? Because that way, every time you do another budget, you can rescore, to get more credit for the same. So when I stretch it out another 5 years, I get to count more money again, even though, I already authorized auctions before. A lot of times when they do that, they'll point to particular bands. Sometimes, like when we did this with the auction, with the digital transition, they said, okay, we're going to take back broadcast spectrum and we're going to auction it off as part of this to raise money. Sometimes they say, we're going to do this incentive auction where we're going to let broadcasters put some of their spectrum up for auction. Sometimes they take a little bit here, a little bit there. This is a big chunk. And that's because this bill is generating a lot of deficit. And so they need a lot more revenue. So this is going bigger than we've gone before with a lot more impacts on wireless policy than we've had before. What's worse is the Senate version is taking away the FCC's flexibility to do things in the public interest. Right now, the way the auction language is written, it says, well, the FCC has to do a bunch of things with auctions. It has to make sure that there isn't excessive concentration of licenses. It has to make sure that people get the benefit of the technology. It has to make sure that we put licenses in the hands of native tribes and women-owned businesses and other things. And now the language that Cruz has put in, which is language that the wireless guys have been pushing for a long time, no surprise, says the job of the FCC is to maximize revenue and maximize efficiency, which turns out to be another way of saying maximize revenue, because how do we measure efficiency? By what produces the most revenue. So This is taking away the FCC's ability to do any kind of balancing to say, well, maybe we should have some unlicensed here in addition to the licensed. Maybe we ought to do something different like CBRS where, we have different tiers that are allowed. Maybe we ought to have some limits on how many licenses you can win at the auction. Now it's all just about maximize the revenue, which means give it to the big three.
Right. It doesn't mean maximize the economy. I'll tell you that right now, because one of the things I always get frustrated with, when Michael said earlier, maximizing revenue for the FCC does not maximize the economic power of this band to produce revenue that would be diffuse into the hands of millions of people and small businesses and things like that, right? So, much like a public park, if you maximize the revenue by building ugly apartment buildings on it, you're not necessarily maximizing the benefits to the community, which needs a park here or there. So including that, so you actually can drive down, to torture the analogy, you can drive down the value of that everyone has by trying to maximize the value individually. You collectively impoverish everyone.
Well, yeah, and it's even worse because auctions are a single snapshot in time of who happens to be here and how much they're willing to bid based on everything from competition to interest rates. So, rather than saying, okay, there's a bunch of different ways we could use this that are going to return a bunch of revenue, that are going to do anything, it's like you have to give us the most cash for this single instant in time, never thinking about the future, never thinking about other people, never thinking about all of the other uses that we could be having. Just show me the money.
Michael?
Yeah. No, that's all right. I would just, kind of reiterate that although Congress has taken advantage of auctions in some prior budget bills, it's never been on this scale and so narrowly focused and so specific, disregarding all the other values. In fact, typically they've restrained themselves to a degree that, left the FCC with the discretion to adopt a more balanced spectrum policy. In fact, in one case, the Mobile Now Act, which was the lead co-sponsors were the current Republican Majority Leader John Thune, ironically, and Senator Schatz from Hawaii. That explicitly required balance. In other words, both more licensed spectrum for auction and more unlicensed spectrum for Wi-Fi. In fact, that bill was what got the ball rolling to create the 6 gigahertz band in the first place, because Congress was under an obligation. I'm sorry, the FCC was under an obligation to create a new unlicensed band, and then decided to go big, with what they did in 2020.
When you, I'll just say that when you take a look at our economy and how it's grown because of so much tech, and granted, who doesn't have a critique about the amount of tech and how it's organized? But nonetheless, if we did not have Wi-Fi available, if we had maximized revenue in previous decades, I think we'd be much worse off today. We'd have a lot less freedom and ability to share our thoughts and generally benefit from the benefits of so much communications capacity that we don't need to get AT&T's permission to use. And so that's where it often comes back to for me, is a concern about whether we're leaving spectrum available for us in the next couple of years or future generations, where they have an ability to innovate and make sure that there's still space that's not claimed by a multinational company. Not because multinational companies are inherently evil, but because there should be a balance of different opportunities for the spectrum. So, that's where I just feel like you're right, though. Congress is very focused on the short term. So for right now, to make sure people understand where we are, the House passed a bill, and a lot of us are not really thrilled about the idea that the FCC has to auction off a certain amount within that area. But it did at least protect the areas that we're pretty concerned about. The Senate now has a bill that is much worse, and the Senate will decide on that. And if that has bad language in it, there would still be a time to fix it in reconciliation. But ideally, the Senate would change the current language that Cruz has put forward, and the Senate would have language that was more balanced, and then that would go to reconciliation. And we still have to fight about it, but we would be on better terms. We would like to see the Senate just go ahead with the House language, right?
Right. I mean, that at this point, that's, ideally it would have just been a clean FCC, you're the expert agency, go figure it out. That's clearly not going to happen. But go back to the House language, give the FCC as much discretion as possible, get rid of this language that says maximize revenue, put back the language that protects the 6 gigahertz Wi Fi band. That's what we're looking for, because otherwise, 10 years from now, your Wi-Fi is going to run the way it runs today on Amtrak or on airplanes, because there just isn't going to be enough space. There isn't going to be anywhere for it to grow. But we keep making more and more tech that depends on more and more Wi-Fi. And unless we protect the space that's been set aside for that growth, it's not going to be there.
Anything you want to add, Michael?
Um, no, I mean, that's really it. I just really, you know, can't emphasize enough that Wi-Fi is just, so central. In fact, a statistic I think most people aren't aware of this. We should have mentioned it earlier that even on, we're talking about how smartphones are the only device for the most part that are connected to both cellular networks and Wi-Fi. And even on smartphones, I don't think many people realize that um, close to 90% of all the data traffic on your smartphone is carried over Wi-Fi and to back and forth to the internet and does not touch your mobile carrier's infrastructure, does not go over the mobile carrier spectrum that they buy at auction, because the iPhones, the other phones today, they all are built to automatically shift over to Wi-Fi as soon as you come in range of a friendly Wi-Fi. And with fiber going out everywhere, that's only going to increase. So our dependency on Wi-Fi for big bandwidth, for quality of connectivity is just increasing. Mobile signals don't even penetrate into buildings very well because the mobile carriers don't build those small cells you mentioned earlier. They don't, there's this trade-off between spectrum and infrastructure, and they don't want to make the investments in bringing cell towers very close to your home, nor do we necessarily want that. It's much better to be using the invisible Wi-Fi that's that everybody can reuse in each different building.
Yes, yeah, and I know that people don't like the towers locally, but I will say that the closer the tower is to you, the less power it uses, and so it's another reason to love being on Wi-Fi. To use less power in your handsets, get better use out of your
Yeah.
batteries. In addition, I'll say like I'm a podcast nut. I download many gigabytes of data every day, and my phone is set to just download when I'm on Wi-Fi. I don't think that I would want to pay. I'm not on an unlimited plan, and so I pay. And I would not want to see the bill at the end of the month for my podcast addiction if I had to get all of it over the cellular data lines.
And the reality is you couldn't. I mean, that's the problem, is it'll just get I mean, you've been on AT&T when it's having a bad day. You're not going to be able to get the stuff that you want. You keep having this short-sighted policy of selling everything off and selling everything off, you know, every day is going to be a bad day. It's just and the sad thing is people aren't going to know why. I mean, if you ask people like where'd Wi-Fi come from? I don't know. Smart people in Silicon Valley invented it. You know, cellular, what does that have to do with it? I don't understand how all of this, how what any of this has to do with me. And it's like, yeah, and you shouldn't have to worry about that. But The reality is, we're talking about taking half the spectrum that was allocated for future Wi-Fi so that it could run at the speeds that are coming into your house, chopping it in half, shoving everybody down there just so that AT&T can get this at auction and try to sell it back to you, and they're not going to do as good a job.
Yeah, and on top of it, I'll just a final note is that this is a bill that will have a deficit, and depending on who you listen to, multiple trillions. It's hard for me to imagine that someone being like, "Oh, you know what? We saved another 30 billion." Like, okay, but like you stole it from my children and my future. Like, it's not that's not the trade-off that I want
And it's
here.
worse because it's like Cruz is saying, I want to have I want to earn less money. I want to have more deficit. I want to take the stuff away from you and sell it to AT&T, and because it's going to cost money to move people around and because we're protecting certain military bands, that means the federal government is actually going to make less money than they would under the House version. But hey, AT&T's in Texas and they're going to be happy.
So there's going to be a call to action from Public Knowledge, we believe, at the end of the week with some more details. This is something that is moving quickly, so it is well worth making sure that your elected officials know about it. Reach out to them, let them know that you're paying attention, and follow that call to action. And let's make sure that we protect these bands.
Yeah. Remember, you don't have to oppose the whole bill. It's a big bill. I get it. If you do oppose the whole bill, great, but Republicans will just tune you out. But if you say, I oppose what Ted Cruz did to the spectrum, I want you to go back to the House version, that's something Republicans can listen to.
Yep.
Yeah, and protect the 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi band. Save our Wi-Fi.
Save our Wi-Fi, protect our Wi-Fi, protect CBRS.
Yeah, these are our small outposts in which we can make sure that we have a lot of future innovation and use in our homes and things like that. Thank you, both of you, for the decades of work you've done to get us here, and then to make sure there's still more benefits coming down the line. And thank you for your time today also.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris, for doing this and spreading the word.
We have transcripts for this and other podcasts available at muninetworks.org/broadbandbits. Email us at podcast@muninetworks.org with your ideas for the show. Follow Chris on Twitter. His handle's @CommunityNets. Follow muninetworks.org stories on Twitter. The handle's @muninetworks. Subscribe to this and other podcasts from ILSR, including Building Local Power, Local Energy Rules, and the Composting for Community podcast. You can access them anywhere you get your podcasts. You can catch the latest important research from all of our initiatives if you subscribe to our monthly newsletter at ilsr.org. While you're there, please take a moment to donate. Your support in any amount keeps us going. Thank you to Arnie Hughesby for the song Warm Duck Shuffle, licensed through Creative Commons. This was the Community Broadband Bits podcast. Thanks for listening.